Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, today we're diving straight into what is, honestly, the absolute ultimate philosophical mystery: human consciousness. For literally centuries, thinkers have been locked in this intense tug of war between our physical biology on one side and our intangible inner spirit on the other. But what if the answer isn't about choosing one over the other? What if the real magic is actually a dynamic bridge between the two? Today, we're going to synthesize Western biology and Eastern spirituality using the profoundly brilliant lens of the Barzakh theory, pulling from classical texts like Ibn Taymiyyah and modern cognitive science. It's a wildly fascinating journey, so let's get into it.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit the problem of consciousness, check out the material versus spiritual divides, explore Fitra, map out the actual consciousness equation, look at this wild concept called the inversion of sovereignty, and wrap up with embodied balance.
Section 1. The problem of consciousness, the hard problem. Let's jump right into the massive roadblock that's basically been baffling scientists and philosophers forever. So here's the core question, right? Why do we actually feel things? You see, modern materialist thinkers, like Evan Thompson, for example, they look at biological processes. They see cellular metabolism, they observe the brain reacting to the environment in this process called autopoiesis. And while all of that is incredibly real and completely valid, it really only captures the biological life, what classical Arabic texts would call the nafs. But it completely fails to answer the hard problem. Why does a subjective, rich inner experience exist at all? Why aren't we just biological robots simply reacting to stimuli? The materialist framework just hits a brick wall here because it completely ignores the spiritual pole.
Section 2, material versus spiritual divides, the two extremes. To really get the solution, we first have to see how different worldviews have completely missed the mark. The contrast here is just staggering. On the Western side, materialism captures the body perfectly, right? But it entirely misses the spirit. Meanwhile, on the Eastern side, like in Buddhism or Taoism, the focus is almost exclusively on the spiritual pole. In those traditions, the goal is often to totally silence the biological noise of the body, treating physical reality like it's just an obstacle or even an illusion, so you can dissolve into a universal whole, like nirvana. So one side ignores the spirit, and the other side negates the body. Honestly, it's like both sides are trying to read a book but intentionally ripping out half the pages.
And that perfectly highlights why we need a much deeper framework. We absolutely need a perspective that unifies the vast physical cosmos with our deep, boundless spiritual center. We don't have to erase the body to find the spirit, and we definitely shouldn't ignore the spirit to understand the body. What we really need is a bridge.
Section 3, Fitra, the first Barzakh.
Finding that connection is everything. And according to the classical sources, that bridge begins with a primordial state known as Fitra. But how do we actually reach that state of Fitra? Well, the sources map this out beautifully through an allegory of 3 mind transformations. First off, most of us start as the camel. We're just passively weighed down, carrying the heavy baggage of blind tradition and societal expectations. But then we have to become the lion. The lion uses this sort of destructive courage to roar, clear the dust, and methodically tear down those false inherited beliefs. Finally, once all that clutter is gone, we become the child. The child creates anew, returning to a pure, original state of harmony. Which brings us to what Fitra actually is. Now, Fitra is not a blank slate, and it's definitely not some rigid, pre-programmed drive. Think of it more as a structural disposition toward harmony with truth. It's kind of like how the human eye is structurally wired for light before it even opens. Fitra is our inner eye. It's the very first Barzakh, which is an Arabic term meaning an intermediary state or a bridge. It's that beautiful, interactive spark that happens the moment our innate human readiness meets the external world. Section 4, the consciousness equation. Building off that idea of the Barzakh, we can finally map out the actual anatomy of human consciousness. Okay, this matrix right here from Ibn Taymiyyah's Barzakh theory is a total game changer. It shows that we literally have 2 distinct intelligence systems. You've got the nafs, the biological body, physically aware, driven by impulses centered right up in the brain. But then you have the ruh, the soul, which comes from the world of command and essentially blankets the entire body. Its intelligence is the aql, or intellect, centered in the fuad. So where do these 2 massive systems actually meet? In the qalb, the heart. That is the exact intersection where biology and spirituality collide, intellectually and emotionally. So, If we put it all together, full human consciousness isn't just neurons firing in a brain, and it's certainly not just some ethereal ghost floating around. It is a dynamic, living equation. Full consciousness is the Barsuk. It's the active, continuous synthesis of biological matter and profound spiritual depth. And you know what? That completely solves the hard problem. Subjective inner experience exists precisely because our spirit injects that deeper dimension directly into our biology. Section 5. Inversion of sovereignty. Now, this equation isn't just frozen in place. It changes dramatically dependent on where we are in our existence. The sources use a really brilliant analogy for this. Think of the yin-yang symbol, right? Each side carries a tiny dot of its exact opposite because they are deeply intertwined. But the Barzak theory takes this into what's called dynamic perfection. The crazy part is that the body and the spirit literally exchange sovereignty or dominance across time. They take turns ruling the system. And honestly, this explains the human condition perfectly. Right now, in our worldly life, biology is the boss. The body is the foundation. We are completely bound by material laws. We get hungry, we feel pain, we get sick. The spirit is just being carried inside this biological vessel. But, according to these texts, in the hereafter, there's a complete ontological inversion. The spirit takes over as the absolute foundation, and the physical body just perfectly forms and follows whatever state the spirit is in. That's why descriptions of paradise mention no hunger or sickness. The body is no longer degrading because it's 100% subject to the spirit. Section 6. Embodied balance and practice. All right, let's bring this grand cosmic theory back down to earth and see how it translates into daily action. So the sources point to the Islamic prayer, or salah, as the ultimate behavioral embodiment of this exact consciousness equation. It's amazing because it doesn't ask you to ignore your body, but it also won't let you neglect your spirit. It demands complete bodily presence, you're standing, bowing, maintaining this highly regular biological rhythm, but at the exact same time, it demands total spiritual presence, humility, mindfulness, aiming yourself at the absolute truth. Doing this 5 times a day is quite literally a physical and spiritual discipline designed to build up that full Barzakh consciousness. And this perfectly captures the wider concept of wasatiyya, or moderation. Now, scholars point out something really important here. This isn't just a compromised, watered-down middle ground where you get a little bit of both. No, wasatiyya is a towering mountain summit. From up there, you can clearly see and integrate both the hard material truths of biology and the profound truths of the spirit. It's a method that refuses to erase either side, creating a truly living, dynamic perfection. So the huge takeaway from all this is that you are a magnificent synthesis. You are the bridge. And as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this. We live in a modern world that is constantly yanking us toward extremes. Either we're totally obsessing over our physical bodies, or we're trying to completely escape reality through screens and distractions. So how will you achieve your own primordial attunement? How are you going to balance the biological noise of your physical body with the pure presence of your spiritual consciousness to build that bridge within yourself? It's something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. Catch you next time.